All right, we are live. I'm going to give folks a few seconds just to join us. For anybody who's joining us live, for those of you who are watching the recording, thank you. We appreciate you. If you're here joining us live, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. So introduce yourself, say hello. We want to hear from you before we get started. I forgot to play my music today. Last time I had a little bit of some lo-fi music. I forgot to add that in today.
Beats.
Yeah, let's see if we can find the music. Get that in here. Oh yes, we played this last time, Daydreaming. It's really...
I can cover up the dog barking that's happening outside.
Yeah, we're rolling with it. Okay, I remember liking this a little bit more last time. This is a little slow.
Into it.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. I mean, we're already a minute after, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Welcome, everybody, to the Career Chronicles, where we will be chronicling the stories of women in the workplace and those who champion us with the hopes of paving the way for inclusive excellence in recruitment and retention. This is our second episode, and I am super excited to have my good friend Anna Flagg joining us. I'll introduce her in a second, but before we dive in, I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Spyglass Partners, my team. Thank you guys for encouraging me to take this step and have this podcast. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Anna. She is currently the Associate Director of Employer Relations in the Vanderbilt University Career Center. Prior to this role, she worked in consulting at Ernst and Young, as a DEI recruiter at Google, and in the undergraduate admissions office at Vanderbilt. She has a passion for higher education, recruiting, and advocacy. And some fun facts about Anna: in her free time, she enjoys snow skiing. She's much better than me at that. Planning travel. You should definitely hit her up about that. Reading, and then going out to eat way too much, which we definitely have in common. Anna and I have spent a great deal of time discussing the ways in which women have to advocate for themselves and negotiate on behalf of themselves in their career and in life in general, of course, but especially in the context of the workplace. And Anna and I have worked together before. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about this issue. So today we want to talk about for the women listening and really for anybody, how to advocate for yourself in your career, how to ask for what you're worth, whether that's compensation or title or responsibilities, and the ways in which you can negotiate that. Anna is actually one of the people who mentored me to do this early on in my career. So I am super excited to have her as a guest to share her insights. I would not be at this place in my career if not for Anna's influence. So thank you so much for being here, Anna.
That is all you. I'm so excited to be here. I also miss you. So it's just fun to get to see you and talk to you.
Get to hang out.
Yes,
so
thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, I'm going to kick us off with the first question. I just want you to give us an overview of what was that first aha moment for you in your career where you first realized I'm going to have to negotiate or advocate for myself to get where I want to get in my career.
Sure. So I'll start with the advocacy piece. I think for me, I started my role in consulting. It was human capital consulting and the typical you travel Monday through Thursday. When I started, our practice was a little bit smaller and we didn't have a scheduler. So essentially you were finding your own work. And the way you generally did that was you networked with senior managers and partners, tried to get on projects, which can be tricky when you are coming in and maybe you intern there, but you don't have a ton of experience. And so I think for me, I realized, hey, if I want to be successful here, it's probably not just going to come to me. And so I think it took me a little while to figure out, how do I put myself out there? How do I ask for work? And then once I started doing that, how do I continue to almost like sell the work I've been doing, right? To be able to showcase to other partners or clients, you know, hey, these are the projects I've done, or this is my skill set. Even if I've only been here 6 months, this is how I've been successful. So I think it took a while to click in. I wish I had started my career just gung ho. I know exactly how to
Well,
find work, how to
who
be
does that?
successful.
That's nobody.
Yeah, exactly. But we think it's everybody. So I remember
Yeah.
looking around thinking, I can't sit on the bench all year because I have to have billable hours. So no matter what, it's on me to figure out what this looks like. And over time, right, as you build rapport with people and you do well, they want you on their projects. So I remember starting to feel like, okay, there's people really in my corner because now they've seen my experience and they want me to continue that. So I remember thinking, I want to do that later on. And I think as far as, the negotiation piece, I remember I don't I don't have a huge recollection of the curriculum per se that I took in college, like a deep knowledge of that curriculum, which probably isn't great. But one class I took was negotiation conflict resolution. And it sounds so simple, but I remember having this aha moment of it never has to just be 50-50. It could be 80 and 40 that's on the table, right? There could be all these other things we're not thinking of as far as negotiation goes. And we can talk more about that in a second. But I remember it
Yeah.
feels silly saying that now, but it was this moment of I just hadn't really thought of it like that in terms of, hey, just because somebody says this is what it is, doesn't mean there isn't room for more, or there isn't room for other things. And so I think that was really helpful kind of going into my career with that as well.
Yeah. I want to pick out something that you said early on about you had to sell yourself. You had to stop and reflect on where do I add value? What are my skills that I bring to the table? You had to figure that out and then articulate it to somebody else in order to get more work or at least justifiable work in the context of consulting. Obviously, you wanted to get the billable hours. So
Sure.
how did you go about doing that? Like, to walk us through your process of keeping track of your achievements, your skills, and then how you kind of shape an argument to pass that on to whoever's in charge of doling out responsibilities.
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question. So as far as thinking through kind of how I kept track on that. So my first role in consulting, essentially whenever we'd get asked to be on a new project or kind of selling ourselves for that, we would send them a CV basically of everything we've
Every
done
time you had to ask for a
at
project.
the company. Yeah,
Okay.
they wanted to see that because the client might want to see that. The manager might want you on the project, but they have to send it to the partner saying, hey, this is why we want this person. And this is the
You
work
almost had
they've
to apply
done.
for a job every time
Kind
there was
of
a
in
new
ways
project.
sometimes. Yeah. And it wasn't super hard to update, but they always say, always have an updated resume, even if you are at the
Yep.
happiest in your job. And so I think
Yep.
it's twofold. I think, yes, having an updated resume is great. And everything you're putting on there, make sure you're actually explaining. I think we all do this sometimes, but we just kind of put the job description, right?
Yep.
And generally what people want to know or in the job search, right? You're a recruiter now. I've
We're
been a
both
recruiter
we've
before.
been in recruiting. Yeah.
Yeah, what you want to know is, but what did you like? How did you
But
bring
what did
value?
you do? Yeah. How did you
Like
bring
what
value?
changed? Was there a shift in revenue? Did you create a new process that led to more profit? Like anything you can give that explains more. So I think the same for me, and I've had people really help me with this over the years, is to figure out, okay, how can I showcase not just like, hey, I'm really good at doing my job description and maybe I bring a lot of fun culture to the office, or you can have all these intangible things that come out in interviews. But I think as far
Interviews.
as
Yeah.
really being able to track, like, hey, what's this person going to do if they're here? Like, how are you going to stand out? So I think, for me, it just started, I really had a running document. It was,
So you
2012.
kept up with it in a document.
Yeah. So
2012.
I just kept it in a running document. It was nothing fancy. And then when we had a new project, I would kind of edit that and
Update your CV.
update
Yeah.
that, which obviously looked a little bit different. And then I think the second piece of your question was,
How
how
do
did I
you
make that?
articulate that? Yeah, like how do you, so you've got your document of the things that you've accomplished or improved in your role. How do you turn that into a narrative that you're going to, let's say you're going to sit down and negotiate a job offer or negotiate a
Mhm.
promotion and you're having a face-to-face conversation with a manager? How do you take those bullet points and turn them into advocacy for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a way you can tie it to, any sort of like goals or OKRs or an evaluation. That's always helpful to say like, these are ways I've exceeded or these are ways I've hit. But I think at the same time, you learn you are your own best advocate and you know your work the best. And so there's times I'm better or worse at this, but I think making sure people know the work that you're doing, especially your supervisor or especially your team, in a way that's showcasing like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like generally, you should never be surprised when someone gets promoted in an area because you'll generally say, that makes a lot of sense. Like I see the work they do, or that's visible or clear to me. So I think again, it feels so strange, especially I think as women, to brag on ourselves or like remind people the work that we're doing. But I think you have to remember, especially people above you, leadership, they have so much going on. And generally, as much as it would be great in ways maybe not, we're not their first thought. So part of it is giving context of, oh, hey, by the way, like I came into this area, we were missing 2 FTEs, and this is how I provided value, or this is how I, kind of held a few roles at one time. Like, everybody's new, so I train the team. Like adding all of those caveats too that you may not write out, I think is super helpful, providing that context and reminding people, because it's really not their job to keep track of everything and remember all the context. So I think it's that balance between like providing that context with them and actually sharing like, hey, this is what I've done, and this is how it's improved something or changed something or made a difference or an impact.
Yeah. And I think that was something that I learned from you when we worked together, is that I was going to have to step up and advocate for myself, that even if the people that I worked most closely with could see the value I was adding, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going all the way to the top up for the folks who make those decisions. And that's a hard lesson to learn early on in your career, because I think coming into the working world, you've been in a school environment where it's like, I do the work, I get graded. I do the work, I get graded, and I get to progress in my grades. This is great. And I get handed a diploma at the end. And it's amazing. And then when you get to the workplace, it's like, so there's not a progression automatically. Like I have to actually, I didn't know that. I think you were the first one that was like, if you want to get promoted, you're going to have to ask. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that's terrifying. Like, are you serious? Like, I think I was going to be like, yeah, I guess I won't get promoted then. I'm not going to do that. But I mean, you pushed me. And so I think I would love to know from you when, I feel like I have 2 questions in one, but wanting to know a time when you did this successfully, when if you are able to share an example of a time you did advocate for yourself, articulate your value, and, it resulted in advancement in your career. Would love to hear that story. And then, transitioning into when you started to help other people do this as well.
Sure. Well, and to one point of what you said, we all learn from other people, right? So you're very kind to say that. I know there were lots of other people as well that were advocating for you. But I remember for me, my first role, it was pretty straightforward of, if these are your reviews, you get promoted. But, both of us working in higher education, and it's so dependent on industry as far as
the structure,
salary negotiations. And I think in education, we can feel like, well, like it's education or it's nonprofit. Like we can't ask for this. And I think that's only harming ourselves. Right.
Usually harming women in the field.
I think we do learn from people in a negative way too, as far as, I think we've probably all had people around that are like, well, you're getting paid way more than I got paid when I started, or you're getting paid way more than these people are at this school.
You should be grateful.
And that is the worst thing.
The worst enemy.
Anybody, because the whole point is like, to feel valued. Can we always get more money or get the promotion? No, but can we always try? And do we want to work with people that are presenting themselves that way and confident and trying? 1,000%. So I think for me, when I took my first role in higher ed, I had a little bit of that same sentiment of, well, I think this is more generally than like maybe is typical for this role, but I'm not really sure. And I remember talking to a mentor at Vanderbilt, and she said, I mean, you have a master's degree. Like, let's talk about this. And I remember, she pushed me, and she ended up trying to advocate on my behalf. And I thought,
Yeah.
I didn't even know you could do that.
To
And
do
I had
that.
watched her
Yeah.
be pretty fearless. She also, was very well respected, which I think makes a huge difference, right? I think
Yeah.
to be able to negotiate and advocate for people, you do have to have a
She already
level
had
of
that social capital built in.
social capital, or just people really valuing the impact you're making, or you, and all of that. So I remember, we didn't get a ton more, but I thought, I hope I can do that for people. And I hope I can remind people that, there might always be more money on the table, and it never hurts to ask,
Yeah.
because we're always going to run into
Yeah.
people that are like, oh no, that's great. Like, you'll get promoted eventually. And so, I think for me, an example of, doing it successfully was when I had another opportunity come on the table when I was in a certain role. And I thought, I really am interested in this opportunity, and the pay is greater than the role I'm in, that I don't know if I'm ready to leave. And so, when I presented that other opportunity, I was honest about how much it was. And then I was honest about, I was asked the question, how much is it going to take for you to stay? Which is
Yep.
always a lose-lose question, because, generally you don't want to say an exact number that you want, because what if they say, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. And that goes back to there always being more money on the table. And so,
Yes.
that's
You don't want to
when,
leave money on the table.
that's when, obviously using some judgment. But I think even when we negotiate sometimes, especially women, we still are afraid to say the number we think we really deserve, or that we really want.
Yeah. We
Because people
settle.
might have a reaction, and that's okay
Yeah.
too. Like, I think we have to be prepared to feel a little bit like dejected, or somebody have a reaction. But in that role, I basically answered the question. I said, why don't you come back with what you think would make sense? And then, we'll talk then. Like, I didn't give a number, because I figured if I gave that number,
You
it would
lose
either
your
be more,
power a little bit.
you lose some power. Exactly. And so then it puts that on them, I think, to come up with, okay. And it was an intersection of a lot of reasons where, I
Yeah.
think it was a good fit to negotiate at that time. You have to be thoughtful about it. But I think that was a good example of, I could have easily said, well, this is what I want.
You could have blurted out
And
the first number and they might have jumped at it. And then you would have been left with those what if thoughts of like, should I
yeah,
have
but I
asked for
think,
more? I don't know.
right. Yeah, exactly. So I think kind of being able to put it back in their court and see, because at the end of the day, you had another role. So if you didn't get,
Yeah.
so that makes it a little
You
bit
had a lot
different.
of
But I think
leverage.
that I think sometimes you need some leverage depending on, the industry. And so I think, in terms of talking with, you and other colleagues at different times, I think the thought process was always, this also came after I had kind of asked, like, what does it take to get promoted? And what does that look
Hmm.
like? And how do you make more money here? So I think, always starting with those conversations first is always helpful before jumping into like, hey, I need
Yeah.
more. Um, but, allowing like somebody like you, who I knew was doing phenomenal work, be able to say like, you know, hey, I'm not afraid to ask for this, and I feel confident in doing that, which I think you did a great job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did ultimately have that meeting of saying, here's how I've exceeded my goals in these areas. These are things I've initiated and implemented. And this is what I think I'm worth. But I think what you said about not letting go of some of your power, I think that's really important because I don't know that I always did that. I think I was willing to settle for any type of bump in compensation or bump in responsibilities or
Mhm.
title. And you do give up a little bit of your power if you show your cards in that way. I would love to know also from you, in your example, you were able to have the leverage of another job offer in hand. That's not always the case. And I know there's other times that we've both advocated for ourselves or negotiated without that specific type of leverage. What are some other types of leverage that you think women can use in these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, are you saying like outside of, like, give me an example? want to make sure I'm
Yeah. So
following
like,
your
yeah.
question.
So I know we've both been in the recruiting space. So we've both counseled
Mhm.
job seekers who are,
Mhm.
they're negotiating job offers, but also if
Yep.
you're already in a role and you're trying to negotiate or a promotion or a raise, if
Yep.
you don't
Sure.
have that other offer in hand to use
Mhm.
as leverage, what are some other things you can take as leverage into those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think being open to potentially like taking on more work, which is it's a tricky area to get into. But I
Yeah.
think, what if you come up with, hey, I'm already doing some of this work, you know, what if my title changes and I get to do some of this work I care about? What if
Yeah.
you think of, oh, there's some of these buckets of work that I'm really not enjoying. So what if the kind of middle ground right now is I get to do more of that work that brings me joy and there's a plan. Like I think another opportunity that can happen too is to say, okay, I understand maybe we can't change my salary a lot right now, but could I be put on a plan? What if it was, okay, every 6 months you'll increase by this much. And so you'll get to maybe where you wanted to get today in 2 years, which doesn't sound overly exciting, but I think again, industry specific, there are
Yeah.
opportunities for that. And then I think in today's world too, being able to say, you know, um, can I negotiate in terms of my work from home days,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
are there other things that I could take on? Is there a professional development initiative that
Yeah.
I can do in the office? Is there something with culture where I can, show that I'm making this impact? I think the conversation should always, the end of the day, the goal is always like a little more money and
Yeah.
potentially what is my future here. And I think, sometimes it's not super black and white of what your path might look like, but I think that's okay to always push back on that and always question that, because I think if somebody is talented and if they are motivated, they have to be motivated by what the future might look like, or else they're going to leave. And so I think,
Yeah.
as a manager, thinking about like retaining talent and what you can do in that space is also make sure you're listening to your people to figure out, like, do you also like your job? Like, we don't want you to leave. What else can we
Yeah.
help with? If we can't give you money right now until 6 months, what else can we do? And I think we've talked about this before too, even in the negotiation space of, hey, maybe we can't negotiate the salary, but is there anything we can change with benefits or
Yeah.
with vacation days, or with certain industries, stock options or bonus structure? There's so many conversations that, I think when I was a recruiter, I had with, a lot of my candidates, because you should always push back, right? Like the conversation
Yep.
there should always be a conversation when there's an offer.
Yeah.
And I think it like breaks my heart a little bit when people don't, especially women, because they might say, again, this is more than I've ever made, or this is what I asked for. This looks really good.
Yeah.
You could probably
And
always get a little
they
more.
might not feel like they have the power to leverage. Like they don't, I feel like as women, we don't always feel like we have leverage. And when I got my first job
Right.
offer, my boss at the time was like, you have to negotiate. And he was like, in the art of negotiation is what is your leverage? And I was like, dude, I don't have any leverage. I'm 22 years old and I am currently in a graduate assistantship making $800 a month. I don't have any leverage. I need a job. And so I think there's a lot of times where women feel that in their career, especially following the year we've all had of layoffs after layoffs after layoffs. So we've both been laid off and we know what that
Mhm.
feels like of
Yep.
like, I have no leverage. I'm unemployed. What am I going to, I'm going to take the
Sure.
first thing that comes my way. And um,
Right.
I don't want to, I don't want to, for some people, there are different scenarios where that, may be the case. You don't always have the privilege to hold out for a better offer or to negotiate. That's
Mhm.
not
Of
always everybody's
course. Yes. A
situation.
great caveat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the caveat. And there's other factors, familial factors, responsibility factors, lifestyle factors, all the above. But I do think there are, like you said, there are certain times where we don't negotiate when we could. And that's what I think we want to avoid. And I think that's what we want to encourage, especially women, to make sure they don't back themselves into that. Something else you said that I wanted to call attention to is, as managers or hiring managers, how do you make people feel valued? Um, the people that you already are already employed with you, or the people that you're recruiting. You and I have probably both seen this on the recruiting side when we have a candidate who's so excited to work for a company and then they lowball the offer. And it's like, that is not going to make the candidate feel very warm and fuzzy, especially when the recruiter's been advocating for them throughout the whole process, saying candidate is targeting XYZ money, and then you come in 10K under. That makes the candidate feel like, okay, they're not that excited about me because we've been really transparent about what I wanted salary wise. So now that you've transitioned into a position, and you can also speak from your time as a recruiter at Google too, but now that you've transitioned to a place where you are a hiring manager or you're managing a team, how do you make sure your people on your team feel valued, and how have you seen that translate to their performance?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'll start with the first question, which is essentially,
I love how I always loop two questions into one. I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. I can drone on so much too. So I'm like making sure that I answer the question at hand. And I'd love to hear, your thoughts on this too, as far as, things you've done. But yeah, I think I learned so much in my year and a half in technical recruiting. And we were DEI focused, which was really, really fun because, we were focused only on underrepresented talent and really uplifting the other, areas in that way as well. And so, for us, it wasn't always just about, the money with candidates. It was us being able to put candidates forward to hiring managers and say, oh, this person was a non-traditional student, and that's okay. And this is why they'd be a good fit. And, I think Google's a very much high volume sourcing recruiting space. So it's unique in ways in that. But there were times like you were really, really trying to advocate with a hiring manager of even just getting them the first round interview, or they might want to see everybody and then cherry pick exactly who they want. And generally when you put 10 people forward, it's not always who you think is going to do the best in an interview. Right. Yeah. And so even to that aspect, being to look at, hey, is there interview bias, right? Like being able to see, okay, this person's a hard grader and they've only done 6 interviews. Let's run them through this one coding interview one more time to really give it a fair shot. And so I think for me, that was really fun because I also had a phenomenal manager and team who really taught me a lot about the ability to push back and not be afraid of that conflict, which was it's the best way to learn, right? And I think that's how a lot of us learn, is watching other people or having a mentor or advocate and saying like, I didn't know we could do that, or I didn't know that was okay. And again, if you have the respect within the business, it's always very helpful in that. And then I think to your second question, I think especially right now, thinking about Gen Z and a lot of people going fully back into work and maybe not wanting to do that, I think the number one thing I'm prioritizing with my team right now is just, are you feeling valued here? How could we make you feel more valued? And also, do you have work-life balance, right? We always used to say this in admissions. It's not life or death. We're not curing cancer. I think sometimes selective admissions can feel
that
in certain ways. But, to me, the kind of ethos and culture of our team is like the utmost important. Yes, I want us to deliver incredible work, but you're not going to do that.
Not at the expense of human beings.
Exactly. You're not going to do as well doing that or be excited to do that if you're not like enjoying yourself or feeling like your work is being seen or valued. And I think the environment I had at Google too taught me a lot about that. Everybody was the people I worked with were so kind, yet so smart and so efficient. And I think I learned, hey, maybe you can kind of have all of these things.
You can have it all.
Not at the expense of, breaking your back every day. Yes, working hard, but at the expense of what?
That's something you and I have always been on the same page about, is that how can I do my job efficiently, effectively? I will exceed expectations. I will go above and beyond, but still have a life outside of work and still not, harm myself to get this job done. I'm not going to give up my entire life to devote to this, this job, but I'm still going to be the best at it. And, we should have a whole nother podcast about that, that topic.
Yes,
But
the work-life balance for
the
sure.
work-life balance. But something
Yeah.
you said that I think is important when we're talking about advocacy is the role of recruiters in advocacy, because, you know, we've both been in tech recruiting. We both know that hiring managers sometimes miss out on amazing candidates for various reasons, various biases when they're looking at resumes on paper, or even interview biases, which you mentioned. And I think it's important as recruiters that we advocate for our candidates. Luke said it in the comments. I can show the comments. I don't know that you can see them until I share them to the screen, but context is key. And as we're good recruiters, it's our job to tell our candidates context and share that with hiring managers, and make sure that we're negotiating and advocating on behalf of candidates. So I think it's good to do that for the people on your team. It's good to do that as a recruiter. And then, as we've talked about, you've got to do it for yourself as well.
Yeah. And I think even to
sure.
that point, you know, you can think the same thing about negotiations of things being left on the table. I think in the recruiting space, you can think the same thing, right? Like maybe this candidate wasn't a fit for this role. Is there something else? Where else can we put them? Can we follow up in 6 months? Like never kind of like ending that relationship, you know, is so important. And so I think the same can go in the job search, right? Like maybe you don't get that role, or maybe you don't even get to interview for that role, but stay in touch. Like there are so many factors, as we know, right? Of even great candidates that don't get the roles for a myriad of reasons. Maybe there's internal team shifts.
Sometimes it's timing is all it is
anymore. Yeah. And so I think like being sure that, you know, you're not just sensing that rejection, but, you know, maintaining the relationships where you can, and, you know,
asking for feedback where you can. And I know you do a great job of that.
Right.
I've seen you set up a meeting with our boss specifically to say, I'm here just to collect feedback on my performance. And not a lot of people are courageous enough to do that. But I think it made you a better, you know, team member, because you were able to reflect and improve on what you needed to, but also know what your strengths were, so that when you met with your boss again to advocate for yourself, you're like, remember what you said about how I delivered these projects better than anybody else? It's time to pay it forward on that.
I did not say it like that, Sloan, but
I wasn't there. So, and we don't have any record of it on camera. So how are we to know how you said it? But
no, and I think so much of it is being patient with yourself too, because it takes time to figure out. And I'm very grateful. I think I started in the corporate world.
Yeah. It sounds like that sets you up for success.
It did in a lot of ways, because again, I think so much of the time in education, it can be this like, hey, but we're here to serve and we're here to help our students, which is 1,000% certain. Obviously, most people in higher ed or education are not in it purely for the money, but that doesn't mean it can't be a positive
Look who's
motivator.
Here. Keldrick, hi. Yes, you have to advocate for yourself. And yeah, those of us in education, that's not necessarily our nature. We want to advocate for other people, and we're really good at it, but then we have to learn how to do it for ourselves as well.
And not being afraid of someone being like, no,
yeah, and being like, okay, that's okay.
Like, okay. And I think, and we'll stay here, but we tried.
I think that's the same when you're on the job search too, is not being afraid of the no, because
it's hard.
It's hard. It is hard. But I try really hard. What makes it easier is trying to figure out what's the little seed I picked up from each one of these experiences. So if I did go to my boss and advocate for myself, which when I finally did do it, I did get a no. And it was like, okay, that's not what I wanted to hear, but what did I learn about myself from this experience of, you know, I got better at asking for what I want and asking for what I deserve. And I was able to articulate my value. So if I don't get it here, now I'm ready to share that in a job interview. Or, you know, I just know more about myself. And I think from each time you put yourself out there and you advocate for yourself, you learn more each time. And I think that can be really valuable.
And even if you don't, you know, even if you're super close to your boss, having another mentor or another person in your corner is huge.
Super helpful. Yeah. And we've both had those people in our careers and I think we probably could have talked another half hour about how to be that type of mentor to other people. And we probably should have another podcast about that, about mentorship and advocating for others.
My podcast career is coming to a close.
No, I think it's just kicking off. I know we're coming close to the end of our time. I just want to really briefly recap what we talked about for people as far as takeaways. And then I have one final question for you. So for job seekers who are watching, or, women in tech or other industries, the takeaway here is to keep track of your value, where you add value, where you've accomplished results, and increased revenue or efficiency by implementing new ideas and solving problems. Keep track of that. Anna recommended a document. Google Docs makes that real easy so that you can share that on your resume when you're applying to jobs, or if you're already in a role, you can use that information to advocate for advancements in your career. The takeaway for hiring managers, I think, is to make it easier for people to advocate for themselves, and not ignoring people or falling into your biases when it comes to hiring or looking to promote internally. And so keeping an eye out for people who maybe shouldn't have to advocate for themselves so much. So I think those are the quick takeaways. The question I'm asking everybody at the end of the podcast is, where or when have you felt most empowered as a woman? So leaving us on a note of reflection.
A note of reflection. Live, love, reflect. Most empowered. Let's see. This is going to sound so cliche, and I'm not just saying this because it's you, but I think being able to see someone negotiate or advocate for me and learn from that and be able to try and do it for other people. I think not always successfully, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it is one of those things. And I think sometimes we can get to that space where we think only if I'm really high up can I really help empower people or advocate for people. You could be one level above someone and say, hey, this is how I got here. This is what I would suggest. And come to them and say, hey, I see you're doing a phenomenal job. I'm curious if you're having these conversations. Do you want to talk more about this? And going out of your way to do that, because I think it's never in our job description. And so anytime someone's done that for me, and generally it's been people that are very busy.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, why do you care? But they do. And I think more people want to help than we realize. And I think that we're moving toward that in a lot more ways as well. I think people are standing up for themselves more and advocating more. It's coming more naturally. We're always going to have guardrails. We're always going to have people who aren't going to do that. But I think taking that non-victim mentality, right? Not being afraid of rejection, saying hey, if this is something I want. And at the end of the day, if you're miserable for a year and you're not getting anything, that's when you start to figure out what else is out there. And so I think, knowing if you start to go into that space, that it may not end how you want, but it's probably going to get you eventually to where you want to be.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. And I appreciate you being here. I wish we had more time. You're gonna have to come back on the podcast, whether you like it or not. Because this is
I
great.
wish Spencer was doing a little.
I should have had Spencer here. Yes, the art of negotiating is an 8-month-old. She doesn't need any help with that.
Yeah, let's start her young. You know what I mean?
She pretty much gets whatever she wants already. So I don't know that she needs any help in the negotiation department. Yeah, she is already very good at it. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, it was good to see you. Welcome back anytime. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.